Dr. Richard Thompson was a man defined by discipline and excellence. As one of the most respected professors at Crestwood University, he commanded respect and occasionally fear from his students. Known for his rigorous grading system and unyielding expectations, Richard prided himself on preparing his students for the real world. To him, leniency bred mediocrity, and failure was simply part of the learning process. Among his current crop of students was Emily Carter, a quiet but determined young woman in her final year of college. Unlike many of her peers, Emily didn't crave attention or validation. Instead, she poured her energy into excelling academically. Her dream was to pursue graduate studies in literature, and she saw this semester as her chance to prove herself worthy of acceptance into a prestigious program. For weeks, Emily had meticulously crafted what she believed to be her magnum opus, a research paper exploring themes of identity and belonging in contemporary fiction. She had revised it countless times, ensuring every argument was sharp, every citation flawless. This paper wasn't just an assignment, it was her ticket to a brighter future. When the graded papers were returned, Emily eagerly flipped hers over, expecting glowing remarks and perhaps even praise from Professor Thompson. Instead, she found a single word scrawled across the top corner: fail. Her heart sank. There was no explanation, no constructive criticism, just a red mark that seemed to mock her efforts. Confused and hurt, she approached Richard after class, hoping for clarity. "Professor Thompson," she began hesitantly, clutching the paper tightly. I don't understand. Could you explain why I failed?" Richard glanced up briefly before returning to his stack of essays. "Your analysis lacked depth, Miss Carter. It wasn't up to standard. But I worked so hard on it," Emily protested, her voice trembling. "Could you at least tell me how I can improve?" He sighed impatiently, his tone firm. "If you need everything spelled out for you, perhaps this field isn't right for you." The words stung like a slap. Fighting back tears, Emily nodded stiffly and walked away, clutching the failed paper as if it might somehow make sense later. Little did either of them know, this seemingly ordinary interaction would set off a chain reaction neither could have anticipated. One that would unravel secrets buried for decades and redefine their lives forever. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the failing grade. It haunted her day and night. She had spent weeks working on that paper, pouring her heart into every word. How could Professor Thompson call it subpar? Was she really not good enough? At first, she tried to push through the pain. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on her other classes, the doubts kept creeping in. Her confidence crumbled. For the first time in her life, Emily began questioning whether she belonged in college at all. One afternoon, she decided to visit Richard during his office hours. She rehearsed what she would say in her head, hoping to sound calm and professional. "Professor Thompson," she said as she entered his office, clutching the paper tightly. "I wanted to ask again about my grade. I still don't understand why I failed." Richard looked up from his desk, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Miss Carter, I already explained this. Your work didn't meet the standards of this course. If you're looking for a different answer, I'm afraid you won't find one here." Emily felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "But I worked so hard on it. I thought I did well. Can't you at least give me some feedback?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. "Feedback won't change the fact that your paper wasn't strong enough. You need to accept responsibility for your work." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Accept responsibility? She had done everything she could. Yet here he was, dismissing her without even trying to help. As she left his office, tears welled up in her eyes. She felt defeated, like nothing she did would ever be good enough. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. Meanwhile, Richard wasn't unaffected either. After Emily left his office, he sat there for a moment, staring at the stack of papers on his desk. Something about their interaction lingered in his thoughts. He prided himself on being fair, on holding everyone to the same high standards. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might have been too harsh with her. Still, he pushed the thought aside. Rules were rules, and emotions had no place in academia, or so he told himself. Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into her studies, determined to prove him wrong. She stayed up late revising assignments, attended extra tutoring sessions, and sought advice from classmates. Slowly, she started regaining some of her confidence. But the bitterness remained. Every time she saw Richard in class, she felt a pang of resentment. Why hadn't he given her a chance? Why hadn't he seen how hard she was trying? What neither of them realized was that their lives were connected in ways neither could imagine. And soon, those connections would come crashing into the open, changing everything they thought they knew about each other and themselves. A few weeks later, Emily found herself back at her adoptive parents' house during a short break from school. Her mom had asked her to help clean out the attic, an old, dusty space filled with boxes of forgotten memories. At first, Emily wasn't thrilled about spending her time sifting through decades-old junk, but she agreed anyway. As she opened one box after another, she stumbled upon something unexpected, a folder labeled Adoption Papers. Curious, she pulled it out and began flipping through the documents inside. Most of it was standard legal jargon, but one piece of paper caught her eye, a hospital form listing her birth parents' names. Her hands trembled as she read the name of her biological father, Richard Thompson. "No way," she whispered, staring at the page in disbelief. Could this really be true? Was Professor Thompson, the same man who had failed her without explanation, her own father? She dug deeper into the box and found an old photograph tucked inside. It showed a younger Richard holding a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The resemblance was unmistakable. That baby was her. Emily's mind raced as emotions flooded over her. Anger, confusion, sadness, and even a flicker of hope. How could he not know? Had he given her up willingly? And if so, why? Her adoptive mother, sensing her distress, walked over and sat beside her. "Did you find something?" her mom asked gently. Emily held up the photo and the adoption papers, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Her mom sighed, pulling her close. "We thought it would be easier for you to grow up without knowing. He gave you up when you were just a few months old. We never heard from him again, and we didn't think he'd want to be part of your life." The explanation did little to ease Emily's pain. She felt betrayed, not just by her professor but by fate itself. All those years, she had been sitting in his classroom, trying to impress him, while he treated her like any other student. Worse still, he had failed her, dismissing her efforts as worthless. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Questions swirled in her mind. Should she confront him? What would she even say? Part of her wanted to march straight to his office and demand answers. Another part feared rejection. If he hadn't cared enough to keep her as a baby, why would he care now? But the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. He owed her an explanation, not just for failing her paper, but for abandoning her in the first place. The next morning, Emily made a decision. She emailed Richard, asking for another meeting under the guise of discussing her grade. If he thought she was coming to plead her case, all the better. It would make the truth hit harder when she revealed it. When Emily arrived at his office later that week, Richard greeted her with the same stern expression he always wore. "Miss Carter," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "What is it this time?" Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I wanted to talk about my paper again. I've worked hard to improve since then, but I still don't understand why you failed me." Richard sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I've already explained this, Miss Carter. Your work simply wasn't good enough." "That's not fair," Emily snapped, surprising even herself with the intensity of her voice. "You didn't even try to help me. You didn't give me a chance." He raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her outburst. "Are you accusing me of bias?" "No," Emily shot back, her heart pounding. "But maybe you should look closer at who I am before judging me so harshly." With that, she pulled out the photograph and slid it across his desk. Richard froze, his eyes widening as he stared at the image of himself holding a newborn baby. What is this?" he stammered, picking up the photo with trembling hands. "That's me," Emily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "And that's you. You're my father." For a moment, there was complete silence. Richard sat motionless, his face pale as the weight of her words sank in. Finally, he looked up at her, his eyes filled with shock and guilt. I didn't know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I had no idea." Emily crossed her arms, fighting back tears. "Well, now you do. So what are you going to say for yourself?" Richard opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. For the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless and completely responsible for the pain in front of him. The air in Richard's office felt heavy, suffocating. Emily stood across from him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, waiting for him to speak. But Richard couldn't form a coherent sentence. His mind raced with memories he had buried long ago. The sleepless nights, the overwhelming grief after losing his wife, and the heart-wrenching decision to give up their newborn daughter because he believed she deserved better than the broken life he could offer. "Emily," he finally managed, his voice trembling, I didn't know about you, about any of this. You gave me away," she said sharply, her tone laced with hurt. "You left me without even trying to keep me." "It wasn't like that," Richard exclaimed, leaning forward in his chair. "Your mother, my wife, she passed away shortly after you were born. I was devastated, barely able to take care of myself, let alone a baby. I thought giving you up was the best thing for you. I wanted you to have a stable home, parents who could give you everything I couldn't." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "That doesn't excuse what you did, or how you treated me now. You failed me, Professor Thompson. Not just as your student, but as your daughter." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He slumped back in his chair, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. How could he have been so blind, so cruel? "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. If I had known." "But you didn't know," Emily interrupted bitterly. "And that's the problem. You didn't try to find out. You didn't care enough to ask questions or look deeper. Instead, you judged me like everyone else." Richard looked at her, seeing not just a student but his flesh and blood, the child he had once held in his arms. The realization was crushing. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I failed you, as a father and as a teacher. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make things right. Please, tell me how." Emily hesitated, caught off guard by his sincerity. Part of her wanted to lash out, to hold onto the anger that had fueled her for so long. But another part, a quieter, more vulnerable part, wanted answers. She needed to understand why he had given her up and whether there was any chance of rebuilding what they had lost. "Why didn't you fight for me?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. "Even if things were hard, why didn't you try to be in my life?" Richard sighed deeply, running a hand through his graying hair. "After your mother died, I fell apart. I convinced myself I wasn't fit to raise a child. I thought adoption was the only way to give you a good life. But looking back, I see now how wrong I was. I should have fought harder. For you. For us." His honesty softened something inside Emily, though it didn't erase the pain. She sat down slowly, clutching the photograph tightly in her hands. "I spent years wondering why you left me," she confessed. "Wondering if I wasn't good enough. And then I walk into your class, thinking maybe I can prove myself to you, and you treat me like I'm nothing." "I'm so sorry," Richard repeated, his eyes glistening with tears. "I swear, if I'd known who you were, I would have done everything differently. You're my daughter, Emily, my own flesh and blood. Nothing will ever change that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Emily broke it. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Whatever you want. If you'll let me, I'd like to get to know you, to build a relationship. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be part of your life moving forward." Emily nodded slowly, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "I need time to think." to process all this. Of course, Richard replied quickly. Take all the time you need. Just please don't shut me out completely. She glanced at him, seeing the raw vulnerability in his face. For the first time, she realized he wasn't the cold, distant professor she had always assumed he was. He was human, flawed, regretful, and desperate for redemption. I won't shut you out, she promised softly. But this isn't going to be easy for either of us. Richard nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I wouldn't expect it to be, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. As Emily left his office, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Anger, sadness, relief, and maybe even a tiny spark of hope. She had come seeking justice, demanding answers, but instead, she found herself facing a man who seemed genuinely remorseful for the choices he had made. Over the next few days, Emily wrestled with her feelings. She replayed their conversation over and over in her mind, questioning whether she could truly forgive him. Could she let go of the resentment that had festered for so long? Meanwhile, Richard couldn't focus on anything else. He canceled meetings, ignored emails, and spent hours staring at the photograph Emily had shown him. Each time he looked at it, he felt a fresh wave of guilt and determination. He owed it to her and to himself to make amends. One evening, he called his sister, the only family member he still kept in touch with, and poured out his heart. I messed up, Karen, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I abandoned my own daughter, and now she hates me. What do I do? His sister listened patiently before offering gentle advice. Start small. Be patient. Building trust takes time, especially after something like this. Just show her you're serious about being there for her. Richard took her words to heart. Over the following weeks, he reached out to Emily cautiously, sending texts and emails checking in on her. At first, her responses were brief and guarded, but gradually, they grew warmer. Then one day, she agreed to meet him for coffee. When they sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, the tension between them was palpable, but so was the glimmer of possibility. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Emily began, stirring her drink nervously, about wanting to rebuild our relationship. And, Richard prompted, holding his breath. I think it's worth trying, she admitted softly. But we have to take it slow. No pressure. No expectations. Relief washed over Richard's face. Thank you, Emily. That's all I ask. For a chance to prove myself to you. As they talked, sharing stories and memories, the walls between them began to crumble. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness and lingering pain, but it was a start. For the first time in decades, Richard felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could heal the wounds of the past and create something new together. Something real. The road to reconciliation wasn't easy. Both Emily and Richard carried scars from the past, wounds that couldn't be healed overnight. But they were determined to try, taking small steps toward understanding and forgiveness. Their weekly coffee meetings became a routine, a safe space where they could talk openly without judgment. At first, the conversations were surface level, sharing updates about school or work, discussing books or movies they enjoyed. Slowly, however, they began delving into deeper topics. Their childhoods, their dreams, and the pain they had both endured. One afternoon, as they sat in the same cafe where they had first agreed to take it slow, Emily decided to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind for weeks. Why didn't you ever look for me? She asked softly, tracing the rim of her mug with her finger. Richard hesitated, his expression pained. I thought about it, he admitted, every single day. But I convinced myself it was better this way, that you were happier without me. And then, life got busy. I buried myself in work, in teaching, in anything that would distract me from the guilt. Emily nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She had spent years imagining what kind of person her biological father might be. A neglectful stranger, an uncaring figure. But sitting across from him now, she saw something different. A man who was flawed, yes, but also deeply remorseful. It must have been hard for you too, she said finally, surprising even herself with the empathy in her voice. Richard looked up, startled by her kindness. Hard doesn't begin to cover it, he replied honestly. Losing your mother shattered me. Giving you up felt like losing a part of myself. But none of that excuses what I did or didn't do. I should have fought harder to stay in your life. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she realized how much they had both suffered. Not just separately, but together, though miles apart. For the first time, she allowed herself to see him not as a professor or a birth parent, but as a human being who had made mistakes, just like her. As weeks turned into months, their bond grew stronger. Richard began attending some of Emily's academic events, cheering her on from the sidelines during presentations and debates. Emily, in turn, started visiting his house occasionally, marveling at the shelves lined with books and photographs of her late mother. She was beautiful, Emily remarked one evening, holding up a framed picture of her mom. A radiant woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. She was, Richard agreed, his voice tinged with nostalgia. And so smart. She would have loved seeing the person you've become. Emily smiled faintly, feeling a pang of sadness for the mother she had never known, but also gratitude for the connection she was building with her father. During these visits, Richard opened up more about his own struggles after losing his wife. He told Emily about the sleepless nights, the days when getting out of bed felt impossible, and the eventual decision to throw himself into teaching as a way to cope. I poured everything into my career, he confessed. But looking back, I realize I used it as a shield to avoid facing my own pain. Emily listened quietly, realizing how much they had in common. Both of them had spent years running from emotions they didn't know how to process. Now, they were learning to face those feelings together. There were still moments of tension, of course. One evening, while reviewing old photo albums, Emily stumbled upon a letter addressed to her, written by Richard shortly after her adoption. In it, he expressed his love and regret, promising to always think of her. "Why didn't you send this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't," Richard replied, his shoulders slumping. "Every time I tried, I panicked. What if you hated me? What if your adoptive parents didn't want me interfering? So I tucked it away, telling myself it was better left unsaid." Emily stared at him, torn between anger and understanding. "You kept it hidden for years?" "Yes," he admitted shamefully. "But finding it now, maybe it's a sign that we're meant to heal. Together." She took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words sink in. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but she knew it was necessary. Not just for him, but for herself. Holding on to resentment would only keep her trapped in the past. By the end of the semester, Emily noticed subtle changes in Richard, not just toward her, but in his interactions with others. He seemed gentler, more patient, especially with struggling students. Once, she overheard him offering extra help to a classmate who was falling behind. "That's new," she teased lightly when they spoke later that day. He chuckled sheepishly. "Maybe I'm learning a thing or two from you." "What do you mean?" she asked curiously. "You remind me why I became a teacher in the first place," he explained. "To guide people, not tear them down. Meeting you has reminded me of that." Emily grinned, feeling a swell of pride. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was proof that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and effort. As the months passed, Emily and Richard's relationship continued to grow stronger. What had started as tentative meetings over coffee blossomed into a genuine father-daughter bond. One built on honesty, patience, and mutual respect. They weren't just repairing the past. They were creating something new, something beautiful. Richard became more than just a professor to Emily. He became her mentor, her cheerleader, and most importantly, her dad. He attended her graduation ceremony, beaming with pride as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. When she announced her plans to pursue graduate studies in literature, he hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've accomplished so much, Emily, and I know your mom would be proud too." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. For so long, she had carried the weight of rejection. First from him, then from herself. But now, standing there with her father by her side, she realized she was no longer alone. She had a family again, a real one. For Richard, the transformation was equally profound. Meeting Emily forced him to confront not only his past mistakes but also the way he approached life. He began reevaluating his role as a teacher, recognizing that his strictness often masked a deeper fear of failure, not just for his students but for himself. He started implementing changes in his classroom, offering more constructive feedback and taking time to understand each student's unique struggles. One day, after giving a struggling freshman a second chance on an assignment, he received a heartfelt thank you note that read, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." The words brought tears to his eyes. It was exactly what Emily had taught him, that compassion could inspire growth in ways discipline never could. Their reconciliation also inspired those around them. Emily's adoptive parents, who had initially been hesitant about her reconnecting with Richard, came to see how much it meant to her. Over dinner one evening, they shared stories and laughter, bridging two families separated by circumstance but united by love. Even Richard's colleagues noticed the change in him. Gone was the stern, unapproachable professor. In his place stood a man who radiated kindness and humility. During faculty meetings, he often spoke about the importance of empathy in education, encouraging others to see their students not just as names on a roster, but as individuals with dreams and challenges. "You've changed, Richard," one of his longtime friends remarked during a casual lunch. "What happened?" Richard smiled softly, glancing at a photo of Emily pinned to his office bulletin board. "I found my daughter," he replied simply. On Emily's 24th birthday, Richard surprised her with a scrapbook filled with mementos from their journey together, photos from their coffee dates, ticket stubs from movies they'd watched, and even a few notes she had written him during tough times. On the first page, he had written a short message. "To my amazing daughter, Emily, the light who showed me the way back to myself. Thank you for giving me another chance. Love always, Dad." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she flipped through the pages, reliving moments that had once seemed impossible. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," she said softly, hugging him tightly. "You forgave me," Richard replied, his voice choked with emotion. "That's more than I deserved, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." In the end, their story wasn't just about redemption, it was about second chances. About finding hope in the midst of pain and building bridges where walls once stood. Emily and Richard proved that even the deepest wounds could heal when met with love, understanding, and forgiveness. Through their journey, they reminded everyone around them, including themselves, that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by connection, by choosing to stand beside someone despite the odds. And as they looked toward the future, together, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to start over. If Emily and Richard's story touched your heart, share it with others. Let us know in the comments. How has forgiveness or family impacted your life? Your stories inspire us to keep creating tales that matter.